This episode of the Restoration Today podcast is brought to you by Airbotics. The new generation of disinfection and odor removal is here with the advanced UVC technology of Airbotics, featuring a hydroxyl generator and an air scrubber in one. Designed by industry veterans and built right here in the US, Airbotics machines not only create hydroxyl radicals to eliminate odors and VOCs, but also use HEPA filtration to capture particulates. And they're already being used by restorers and training schools across the country for jobs of all shapes and sizes. Step into the future of restoration today and learn more about the Airbotics trial program and how to buy at airbotics.com. Hey restorers, thanks for checking out this episode of the Restoration Today podcast. I'm excited to be joined by a dear friend in the industry, and he's actually returning to the podcast after being the first guest on my podcast when I bought CNR in the summer of 2021, and he was talking about a different book then. So I'm excited to have Chuck Violand back with me. He's the founder of Violand Management Associates, and we are talking about his new book, Forging Dynasty Businesses. And I will say, for readers like me who get a little ADD and struggle through business books, this was such a good read. Chuck wrote it in a way that is very easy to digest, short chapters, great stories, real life stories included in a lot of the chapters, a lot of questions to ask yourself throughout. It's just like a really useful book that doesn't feel like, you're getting weighted down by the amount of information and I just can't get through it. So Chuck, great book. I'm excited to have you here, excited to talk about this. Go ahead and introduce yourself for people who may not know you, that's hard for me to imagine that there are people that don't know Chuck Violand at this point. But anyway, go ahead and introduce yourself and share the background of Violand a little bit.
Well, I'm Chuck Violand. I'm the founder of Violand Management Associates, and we've been at it now for, I want to say, 35 or 36 years. That's how long we've had the practice, and I've been privileged to be able to surround myself with some really talented people who have forged the growth of this organization over the years. Guys like Tim and Scott and John and Bill and all of them, really, Karen and everybody, Jeff, right? Michelle, you know all of them, so you know how talented these folks are.
Yeah, you have a very, very good and very diverse team where everybody is like an expert in their own field, which is a unique area to be in, where you can be in one room and surrounded by people that know stuff about sales, HR, operations, finances, you name it. Everybody is so different, and there's a lot of knowledge all in one room. I want to know kind of when you got the idea for writing this book, Forging Dynasty Businesses. At what point were you inspired to write this book, and how long has it kind of been in the works to come to fruition in the actual print version that we have now?
It's a great question, and it's kind of a long story. So if you could just bear with me here while I go through it. I believe that it was an article in Harvard Business Review that I read that I came across back in 2018. I think it was 2018. And it talked about how a lot of large organizations, we're talking about Google, GM, GE, how they were using employment as a competitive tool. Mm-hmm. Basically, what they were doing was they were outsourcing a lot of the mundane tasks that were being performed within the organization to free up resources to attract better talent at the top end of their organizations so that they can become more competitive. And all the people that they were attracting were bringing all of the benefits that highly talented people bring to an organization. And while that was written for Fortune 500 companies, huge multinational companies, as I was reading it, I'm thinking, the same thing applies to small business owners, like the people that we were working with. And I thought, if it can work for them, why can't we scale it to work with companies the size that we work with? So I came back and I wrote up a memo to the consultants and sent it off to them. And then we got into a discussion about it. And we all agreed, conceptually, it seems like it would work for small businesses. So we took that and turned that into a workbook called Culture Forge. You might remember a workbook that we wrote years ago called Culture Forge. Yep. And it had predictable steps in there that we had observed, that we used in the work that we were doing with our clients to help them attract better people. That workbook turned into an app that we introduced at the Executive Summit a couple of years later. Yep. And then that eventually morphed into Forging Dynasty Businesses, because it really deals with enduring teams, how to attract the right people. But Michelle, if you remember back to those years, there were a lot of forces at play at that time. Back in 18, 19, even 20, the employment market was just so scarce. It was incredibly difficult, especially for small businesses, to attract people of the caliber that they needed to move their businesses where they wanted to go. Just getting somebody to show up for an interview. You remember those days. I mean,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of M&A activity going on.
Yep.
So a lot of the larger competitors were getting even larger and making the employment pool even smaller for the small independents or small franchises that were trying to attract the right kinds of people. You add into that the fact that this is just when millennials were coming in and force into the market, creating all kinds of havoc for a lot of traditional employers, baby boomers, who weren't used to the demands, if you will, that millennials were making on the employment market. And then you roll into that the overemphasis on four-year degrees rather than trade schools. I mean, the U.S. economy had moved far away from that.
Yes.
So the pool of those people for the trades or for direct labor work, that had even diminished more. And then you throw in the real wacko COVID that hit, and it threw everything into disarray.
Yeah.
So suddenly something that was a problem to begin with became a major issue. And so that was really the driving force behind it. All of this, I think what we discovered during the process was that the game changed basically with respect to people. People were no longer just an expense. People were no longer just a competitive strategy. They were a growth strategy.
Yeah.
Companies had the work. They couldn't get the work done because they didn't have enough of the right people to actually produce the work. So the impetus behind getting the book written and behind the workbook was helping small business owners who typically aren't particularly good recruiters, let's put it that way.
Yep.
They don't understand how that works. They're usually not patient enough to follow the steps that are necessary. So we wanted to put a tool in their hands that would help them become better at finding the right people, vetting the right people, and creating a culture where people actually wanted to be and stay.
I love
So I don't know if that makes sense, but that was a long way around that, but that's really how it came to be.
It does. And I think a lot of owners, they say, oh, well, we have a great company culture, but what does that mean? Like every company does have a culture, but it doesn't mean that it's a good culture. There's a lot that goes into it, which is a lot of the topics you cover in here. So I don't want to give away all of the book, but Chuck has chapters in here about how to handle high performing team members and compensation and hiring and leadership and onboarding, all big topics that restorers are constantly talking about at conferences and amongst each other. So how did you decide? I mean, you made the book really easy to digest, where you almost can even just take the chapters themselves and use that bit of information even without other parts of the book. So how were you able to formulate a book where you almost have like books within a book, right? Was that kind of your premise?
Yeah. If you think about it, you made the comment in your opening remarks about a book written that would appeal to you, who can be distracted. And look, if you're a business owner, you're automatically distracted, right? Yeah. And so most of us aren't going to be inclined to sit down and read through a book front to back. We get typically bored with them by about halfway through. We always see the bookmark about halfway through a book.
Yep.
So we didn't want that to happen. So we did break it into chapters based on the key challenges that we identified with the clients with whom we were working. And so we took, we had many discussions internally about what are the biggest challenges we find our clients are having in bringing the right people on board. And so we boiled it down to 13 or 14 chapters that dealt with each one of these issues and then went into that specifically. And you're right. I mean, we wrote it in a non-academic, easy to follow, easy to read style, at least what we were trying to make it, easy to read style.
It is. It's very digestible and like a lot that you can take away from it really quickly, which is really nice. So explain, I have a couple like more specific questions, but I don't want to give away a lot of the book because I want people to buy it and read it, obviously. But explain the concept that you talk about in the book of transactional players. What does that mean? Who are those people within a company?
Yeah. Well, first of all, transactional players aren't necessarily bad players. Okay, they're not bad people or bad players. They're only going to go so far as contributing to the culture, contributing to the values of the organization. And what we recognize is that values and culture are very important to creating an environment where people want to go to work. So with that said, you can usually identify transactional workers by their focus. Let's just go with that, by their focus, personal focus. If you use bonuses or commissions as an example, and I'm not suggesting don't use them, just watch how they're used.
Yep.
And when you have an employee who is hyper-focused on their commission at the expense of other people, in other words, give me all the good projects, give me all the easy work so that I get the most commission, I'm not worried about the other people here, that's a transactional employee. Or when you have somebody, even if it isn't commissioned, who does only their job and nothing more. They have no interest in contributing to the overall value of the company in terms of culture, interaction with the other people, relationships. It's just pretty much, I'll do my tasks and I'm out of here. Again, they're not bad people, and frequently they are good performers. They're just limited performers.
So how do you recommend, which I know this is a little bit in the book, but I'm sure everybody can relate to this. These can be tough people on the team. Like they could do a good job, but they don't really care about fitting in. They care more about, I get to work every day at 7:30 and
Yep.
I am out, but you pay me until 4:30 and I am out then. And they're always on time and never late and they are completely reliable, but they don't necessarily fit the culture so much or that team mentality. So how do you coach owners or leaders through having a transactional employee who's good at their job, but might maybe bring a little friction with them just because they don't fit into the team as well as maybe some other people do? Because there are people like that out there who just want to be able to clock in and clock out and don't feel the need to have a social life at work.
Right. And Michelle, you may never get through to those people. Okay, let's just start with that. You're not going to get through to everybody. It is not for everybody, and they might work better in somebody else's culture where it's not an important thing.
Yeah.
But if it is important to you, you do get involved in those individual conversations, trying to figure out where they are mentally, is what I mean, where their head is in terms of the hierarchy of values that they place culture on. Cultural, that's what I want to use here. Cultural fit might be very low on their priority list.
Yeah.
They might only be driven by that. And as long as you're saying, as long as they're not having a negative influence on the overall culture of the company, I think that we do have to be flexible enough as business owners, as business leaders, to embrace all different types of people, but to make sure that they're not having a negative impact on our overall culture.
Yes. Yes. Okay. In restoration, we talk about as well the importance of helping younger generations come in and build a career and recognizing our employees and things like that. So talk a little bit about how often owners should be celebrating and recognizing the things that are happening within their team and how, like, maybe some tips and tricks of how owners can make sure that they're being consistent. I think we get, again, distracted. And so we can be like, oh, I thanked our team recently, and it actually could be 9 months ago, and they've completely forgotten that it's happened at all, and they're angry with you at this point. So how can owners and leaders keep up with kind of that celebration, that praise, that feedback, that interaction?
I think earlier in your question, you were saying how often, and you should do it all the time in different ways. Frequently as business owners, and you're dead on the money with, I did that once 9 months ago.
Yeah.
We tend to go after the big flashy things just to be able to say that we did these things. My caution to many small business owners is don't think in those terms. It doesn't have to be elaborate, expensive, extravagant. Make it small things. Spend time with your people. Carve out the time to be with your people. As business owners, this as a business owner. As business owners, we're easily distracted. We're buried with stuff that we feel needs to be taken care of. But when we see the impact that a healthy culture has on the performance, the financial performance of our companies, I think that if we truly bought into that, we would reprioritize the use of our time and spend more time with our people. engagement with your people is a mindset, not an event.
Oh,
So we need to view it that way. We need to find the time. Have small conversations, one-off conversations with your people. Ask questions. Study after study has shown that what workers want is to know that the owner cares about them, that they appreciate the value that they're bringing to the organization, and that the owner's listening. Listen, sit down, spend some time with them. And I don't mean that it has to be a big formal event where you're sitting down.
Yeah.
When you pass them in the hallway, show an interest. How are the kids? How is the soccer match? What's important to you? What drives you? Simple conversations. Have lunch with the group. Those are ways to build a culture one event at a time. Those are the ways to build employee retention one conversation at a time, because you know them and they know you. So start small, do small things. If you want to do fancy things, retreats, offsite retreats, that's fine, but it's meaningless if you only do those and don't show interest in between. It's going to be viewed with cynicism then.
Yes. Okay, another big topic in our industry is compensation, which is something that you talk about in the book. So talk a little bit about the premise of what you've learned in the industry over time. This is a difficult industry, I think, when it comes to compensation, and more so since the pandemic, like you said earlier about, people can go work at Home Depot inside and make a pretty decent wage without going into sewage-filled basements and spider-infested crawl spaces and all those things. So, and on the leadership side, incentivizing those higher up leaders to continue forging ahead in the company. So talk a little bit about the premise of the compensation chapter to kind of tease people into, you should really read this to get out what you need to have a good compensation structure.
Well, compensation starts with mission and with values. All right. If somebody's not buying, especially younger workers, if somebody's not buying into the mission, why are we doing all this? Or the values, what we stand for on a day in, day out basis, I don't care what you're paying them, eventually they're going to leave. Because just like you say, they're going to find better compensation someplace else, no matter how much you're paying them. Then what should happen is that your compensation should follow those things. It should not just be on the technical performance, in other words, the KPIs, the metrics, the way you measure it, but also how they embrace the culture of the organization. Tie the compensation into that. And the compensation doesn't just have to do with the dollars that you're paying somebody per hour or in a salary. You also look at flexibility of schedule. How forgiving are you when people have a personal emergency or when they have a personal interest that they want to follow? Are you flexible with your schedule? And I don't mean you're giving time away, but just that you're flexible with those things as long as the work is getting done. Michelle, I think a lot of times we make a mistake as business owners. Okay, fundamentally, I think we make a mistake as business owners. And when we take a look at compensation, we look at it from the perspective, frequently, we look at it from the perspective that I'm going to pay this much money per hour or this much money per year. What's the most I can get out of them or out of this position for the money that I'm able to pay? I think we should turn that question around. And as business owners, we should ask ourselves, what's the most they can get from me for the money that I'm having to invest? And by that, what I mean is, how will this person, regardless of what I'm paying them, make me a more effective, a better business leader? How will them being part of our team contribute to the overall growth of our organization? I might view compensation a little differently then, because I know that if I get that right person on board, if I'm paying a few more dollars, that's a great investment in the future of my company. It will produce financial returns.
That is a great point. I was listening to a panel earlier this week of company owners in the insurance space, and one of them was talking about how her son and daughter are now entering the workforce, and how they have the upper hand now as the employee. They have the upper hand during interviews of what can the company also bring to me? What value are you going to bring to me as the employee? Like that's going to be a huge shift, and it already is shifting in our economy where the employer no longer necessarily has the upper hand. It's that interviewee, that potential employee that's going to like, well, what value can you bring me? If I'm bringing you mine, what are you bringing me? It's not just a paycheck anymore.
Correct. And look, if they're younger workers, and look, this is speaking from a guy who's not a younger worker anymore, okay? Yeah, I've been at it a while. But if we take a look at it from a younger worker's perspective, they haven't learned a lot of the lessons that we've spent a lifetime learning.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, as long as we don't shove it down their throat, or as long as we're respectful about the lessons, they learn from those things and they appreciate that. That's another form of compensation.
Yes.
In other words, you're showing me, the young worker is saying, you're showing me what it's like to work in an enlightened organization or in an advanced organization.
Yes.
Invaluable lessons.
So as you were writing this or once it was completed, what do you hope anybody who reads this walks away with? Do you have like two or three things that you're really hoping your readers walk away with when they're done?
Yeah. If I can make, how do I want to put this? If I can make hiring and keeping really good people easier for them, and help a small business owner know how to feel confident that they know how to attract the right people and that they are attracting the right people, then I've done my job in writing the book. If I can help them see the role that they as the business leader play in that, I'm talking about their thinking, their behavior, how all of that rolls into their ability to attract the right people. If I can help them understand that and accept that, then the book has done its job, because they'll get better people.
Yes. Okay, share a favorite story or two from the book. You do share great stories, or maybe you don't share a story. Maybe it's not from the book. I don't know. Maybe it's a favorite story from your time in the industry and consulting that teases people toward what some of the stories sound like in here, whatever you like. But I love stories. So tell a story.
Well, we told stories in just about every chapter because I love stories too. And those are real stories, Michelle. They're not made up. Again, I want to be real clear. I didn't write the book alone. I had several of the consultants internally who contributed a lot to this book. And I want to do a shout out to Tom Klein, who did a lot of the heavy lifting in the actual writing of the book. And then Karen Tersley, Karen, in editing the book. So, the consultants and Tom and Karen, they were a huge part of the writing of this book. Several of the stories are mine. And so a lot of the other consultants also contributed their stories to a particular chapter. If you look at the one about making room at the top, what that has to do with is, if you haven't read the book, when you start to read the book, you might go, the people I have in place right now aren't the people I need in their positions. Good people. They might have been really good at one point in your company's growth, but now where your company is, or maybe where you are mentally, they're not the right people to move the business forward. And so you have a tough call. And there are a couple different ones that I was using as a model in there. One in particular was an early client who had an operations guy who had been with him for a lot of years. And he was probably a very good operator and a good operations guy early on. As the company grew, he had no idea how to manage people. He had no interest in learning how to manage people. He was just bludgeoning them, and expecting to get results. He was loyal. He had been with him for years. And it was very difficult to get him dislodged from his position and allow his acolyte, basically the guy that was right under him, let him rise to that position because he was really the better leader. The second guy was the better leader. So that's one. There's another chapter in there where we talk about the owner impact on the business and the owner impact on the culture of the business. And there are two actually in that chapter. One was an owner that we've worked with in the past, and we don't mention names of anybody, so all your listeners can kind of breathe a sigh of relief.
Is it me?
Yeah, exactly right. Your name is not in here, so we protected the innocent and the guilty. This guy, Michelle, this one that we wrote about, very abusive personality style.
Okay.
Bludgeoned people in his organization, berated them, and
Ugh.
then couldn't figure out why he couldn't get people to stay and why he didn't have a happier organization. And then converse to that, we wrote about one business owner who had a totally different mindset and really delegated both authority and responsibility to his team of leaders within his organization. And they were pretty much running the show, and he was guiding the show. But it could have been any of several clients that we've worked with over the years who have demonstrated those. I do know that when we got the actual story, the name was attached to it. We simply removed the names.
Yeah.
But that's one, because I think it helps us as business owners, if we're honest, it helps us as business owners maybe see ourselves, and not in a negative sense, but in a sense where we can say, well, okay, so here's how I can improve. Here's what I might need to do if I'm going to be serious about creating the culture that will allow me to have a life, because I've got loyal people, competent loyal people, who can run this business without me having to be there every day.
Yeah. Some of those stories deal with, as an owner, having to have really difficult conversations. What advice do you give owners when they're facing a really difficult conversation of like, hey, maybe you're in the wrong seat, or hey, I need to move this person above you, or you're talking to an owner who's just too abrasive and you're trying to help that owner see what's going on? Like, how do you prep people for those conversations?
Lots of conversation, Michelle, lots of conversation. Earlier this week, I spent with a group of restoration contractors. And in the course of the meetings that we were having, actually it was at a social event, I was listening to one of the people there, and she's going to have a baby. Okay. But they've already got a son who I think is 2 years old or 3 years old. And so they're going to have a new baby. And so what they were talking about in their conversation at the dinner the night before was how they're getting baby books to read to the 3-year-old. Well, you know this, Michelle, you've got a couple of kids.
Yep.
You prep them for the arrival of the new baby.
Yes.
And I said, so why are you doing that? Why go to all that trouble? Well, because I want to make the transition so much easier, not just for the new baby, but particularly for my 2 or 3-year-old.
Yeah.
It's no different in business. At the end of the day, we're all just kids in grown-up clothes, right?
Yes.
And so we have to recognize that. We have to have lots of serious conversations, candid conversations with love with the people in our organizations. It won't be a one-off conversation.
No.
I'm going to have several conversations with somebody. First of all, to help them, coach them into maybe rising to the occasion where they can fulfill the higher obligations. And if we can't, then they'll probably recognize it. And they'll recognize the fact that we did our best to help them do it. And it's going to make whatever decision we have to make, demotion, set aside, whatever it is, or even leaving the organization, so much easier. Never easy, but easier.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Anything else that you want to add? Any other highlights from the book that we haven't talked about? Anything? And then we'll talk about where people can get it. But I want to make sure, anything else you want to talk about related to the book?
Yeah, the only other comment probably on the book, Michelle, is that it's called Forging Dynasty Businesses for a reason. We chose that word forging intentionally. Growing a business is hard work. It's more baptism by fire than it is a walk in the park. And so business owners in growing businesses typically end up with burns and scratches and cuts and scars. We understand that. And so if we're going to suffer that pain, why not have something worthwhile to show for it after all that struggle?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we chose the name of the book that we did.
I love it. Awesome. Okay. Where can people find it if they want to buy it?
Thank you. Yes, you can find it a couple of different places. First of all, Amazon.com.
Yep.
Go on there, buy your copy of the book. You can also get it at Business Expert Press, BEP Press. That is our publisher. And I believe that we have a link to it. I would be remiss. Jonesy would kill me if I didn't mention this. We have a link to it on our website. Yep. You can go to our website and buy it.
Violand.com is where you can go there, and you can find it also on the CNR website and other places. You should be able to find it pretty easily. Chuck, congratulations on another book. Well done. I really did enjoy reading it. And thank you for all that you do for the industry as well. You really impart a lot of wisdom into the industry and into owners and help really lift people up and encourage people. So thank you very much for all that you do. And I look forward to seeing you throughout show season.
Well, thank you for all you do for the industry too, Michelle. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Chuck.
For more Restoration Today and the latest news, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com, and find the latest episodes of the Restoration Today podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.